The air in my grandfather's old study was thick, heavy with the scent of cedar and a tension so sharp it felt like it could draw blood. My stepmother, Sandra, stood by the mahogany desk, her hand outstretched, trembling not with fear, but with a cold, calculated greed. "The pin, Maya," she hissed, her voice a jagged whisper that scraped against the silence. "Give me the access code to the trust account now, or I promise you, you won't walk out of this house with a single cent to your name." I didn't blink. I didn't even breathe. I looked past her, searching for a ghost of the man I used to call my hero. My father, David, stood by the door. This was the man who had carried me on his shoulders through the streets of Phoenix when I was 6, the man who had promised my mother on her deathbed that I would always be protected. But that man was gone. In his place stood a stranger with hollow eyes and a heart hardened by Sandra's poison. He didn't look at me with love. He looked at me like an obstacle. Without a word, he reached for the heavy brass handle and slammed the door shut. The thud echoed through the room like the closing of a tomb. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. But I kept my face a mask of stone. Then it happened. My father, a man who had never raised his voice to me in 28 years, raised his fist. He stepped into the light of the brass desk lamp, his face contorted in a sneer of pure, unadulterated rage. He expected me to crumble. He expected me to fall to my knees, to sob and beg for his mercy, to hand over the digital key to the legacy Grandpa Arthur had spent 40 years building. He thought he knew me. He thought I was still that little girl who would hide under the covers during a thunderstorm. He moved closer, the shadow of his fist looming over me like a dark wing. "Don't test me, Maya," he growled. "I am your father. Everything in this house, everything in that bank belongs to me. Now give her the code." I looked him straight in the eye, the same deep amber eyes we both inherited from the man who actually built this empire. I didn't back down. I didn't look away. Instead, I slowly, deliberately raised my leg. Sandra gasped, thinking I was about to strike, and my father's fist tightened, ready to swing. But I wasn't aiming for him. My foot moved toward the underside of the heavy cedar desk, searching for the small, recessed button that only 2 people in the world knew existed. Grandpa Arthur had installed it 30 years ago for a different kind of intruder, but tonight it was going to serve its true purpose. As my toe made contact with the cold plastic of the silent alarm, a high-pitched, imperceptible signal was sent directly to a private security firm 3 blocks away. At that moment, something happened that no one in that room, not Sandra, not my father, could have ever expected. The power to the entire house didn't just flicker, it died. And in the sudden, suffocating darkness, the predator and the prey switched places. My name is Maya Miller. I am 28 years old, and 10 minutes ago, I realized that the people who share your blood aren't always the people who will protect your heart. I spent my whole life trying to earn a seat at a table that was already being sold from under me. Welcome to the channel, a place where we peel back the layers of family secrets and find the strength in the truth. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own home, or if you've ever had to fight for what is rightfully yours, then this story is for you. Before I take you back to the beginning, to the day Sandra entered our lives and the day my father chose a stranger over his own daughter, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps these stories of resilience reach the people who need to hear them most. Drop a comment below and let me know where you are watching from today. I read every single one of your stories, and they remind me that none of us are truly alone in our struggles. Now let's get into how the Miller family empire began to crumble from the inside out. To understand why my father was ready to strike his own daughter in a darkened study, you have to understand the man who built that study in the first place. My grandfather, Arthur Miller, was a man who smelled like cedar shavings, old blueprints, and the dry, honest heat of a Phoenix summer. He didn't believe in shortcuts. He used to say, "Maya, a house is only as strong as the integrity of the person who poured the foundation. If you cheat the concrete, The walls will eventually tell your secret. I was 8 years old when he first took me to a job site on the edge of Scottsdale. The Arizona sun was a physical weight on my shoulders, but Grandpa Arthur walked through the dust like he owned the air itself. He picked me up and set me on a stack of raw lumber. He pointed to a massive steel beam being hoisted into place by a crane. "You see that, Maya?" he asked, his voice gravelly but warm. "That's the load bearer. Everything else, the glass, the marble, the expensive paint, it's all just decoration. Without that beam, the whole dream collapses. You be the beam, sweetheart. Always be the thing that holds the weight when everyone else is just looking at the paint." I believed him. I believed every word. Back then, my father, David, was his shadow. David was a good man then, or at least I thought he was. He was the one swinging the hammer, the one getting his hands dirty, while Grandpa Arthur handled the arithmetic at his heavy cedar desk in the study. Our house in Phoenix was filled with the sounds of laughter and the smell of my mother Sarah's lemon herb chicken. But the foundation of our world began to crack when I was 12. My mother was diagnosed with a rare heart condition. For 2 years, the house that used to be full of music became a cathedral of whispers and the rhythmic, clinical beep of monitors. My father changed then. The man who used to be a load bearer started to buckle under the weight. He couldn't look at my mother without tears, so he stopped looking at her altogether. He started spending more time at the office, leaving me and Grandpa Arthur to sit by her bed. When she passed away on a Tuesday in October, the silence that followed was deafening. My father didn't just lose a wife, he lost his compass. He became a ghost in his own home, moving from room to room with hollow eyes, avoiding the gaze of the daughter who looked exactly like the woman he had lost. Grandpa Arthur saw it. He saw the weak spine developing in his own son. That was when he started taking me into his study every Sunday after church. The room was a sanctuary of dark wood and the soft glow of a brass lamp. He would sit me in the oversized leather chair, the one I was still too small for, and explain things that an average teenager wouldn't understand. He taught me about operating agreements, trust clauses, and the power of a quiet title. "Your father is a builder, Maya," Grandpa once told me while he tapped a thick legal folder. "But he's not a protector. He builds things for people to see, but he forgets to protect what's inside. I'm leaving this business to him, but I'm leaving the keys to you." He set a small, gold-embossed card on the desk. On the back, written in his precise, old-fashioned script, was a code. "This is more than a PIN for a bank account, Maya. This is the access code to a legacy I've built specifically for the day when the walls start to shake. Keep it. Don't give it to anyone, not even your father, until you are certain the foundation is about to break." I didn't understand the gravity of it then. I was just a girl who missed her mom and loved her grandpa. I tucked that code away in a velvet box under my bed, thinking it was just a backup plan for a rainy day. Grandpa Arthur died 3 years ago. They found him at that very same cedar desk, his reading glasses still on, a half-finished cup of coffee cold beside him. He looked peaceful, as if he had finally finished the last calculation of his life. At the funeral, the whole of Phoenix seemed to show up. He was a man who remembered your name and your dog's name. But while the city mourned a builder, I was mourning my last anchor. My father stood at the graveside, looking smaller than I had ever seen him. He looked like a man standing on a sinking ship, desperately looking for someone, anyone, to tell him which way was north. And that was exactly when Sandra appeared. She didn't come with a shovel. She came with a smile that was too bright for a funeral. She was a family friend who had supposedly worked in the accounting department of a rival firm. Within 3 months, she was having dinner at our house. Within 6 months, she was moving her furniture into my mother's bedroom. I watched it happen like a slow-motion car crash. My father, desperate for the comfort of a woman's touch and a voice that told him he was still a leader, fell for every choreographed move she made. Sandra was warm at first, the kind of warmth that feels like a heat lamp, artificial, and only focused on what she wanted to grow. She started calling me honey and asking about my little job as a junior architect. But I saw the way her eyes lingered on the paintings in the hallway. I saw her fingers tracing the edge of Grandpa's cedar desk when she thought no one was looking. She wasn't interested in the Miller family. She was interested in the Miller ledger. As I turned 25, the shift became permanent. My father stopped asking for my opinion on company projects. The Sunday dinners, once a tradition of discussing the business and the family, became a stage for Sandra to talk about modernizing the firm and reallocating assets. I remember sitting at the table, looking at the empty chair where my mother used to sit, and then at the head of the table where my father sat, nodding like a puppet to everything Sandra said. "David, darling," she would say, her voice like honey mixed with glass. "Maya is so busy with her own life. We shouldn't burden her with the stress of the firm's legacy. Why don't we refile the trust documents? It would be so much cleaner for everyone." My father would look at me, then at her, and his spine would soften just a little more. "She's right, Franny. I mean, Maya. Sandra is just looking out for our future." Our future. That was the lie they used to start the demolition of my life. But they forgot one thing. Grandpa Arthur hadn't just taught me how to read a blueprint. He had taught me how to find the hidden cracks in a structure before the whole thing came down. And I knew, as I watched Sandra pour my father another glass of wine, that the cracks were spreading fast. Sandra didn't start with a scream. She started with a whisper. She entered our lives like a soft spring rain, but I soon realized she was more like a slow-moving flood, quiet, relentless, and designed to wash away everything my mother had built. It began with the small things. 3 months after she moved into the Miller estate, I came home from my architecture firm to find the hallway smelling of expensive jasmine instead of the cedar and lavender my mother always preferred. I walked past the mahogany console table and stopped. The framed photo of my mother and me at my high school graduation was gone. In its place stood a tall, silver-rimmed frame of Sandra and my father at a charity gala I hadn't been invited to. "Maya, honey," Sandra called from the kitchen, her voice light and artificial. "I hope you don't mind. That old photo was getting a bit dusty and the frame was so dated. I've put it in a safe place for you." A safe place turned out to be a cardboard box in the garage, tucked behind a stack of old tires. That was her strategy. The radiated warmth. Sandra's warmth had a radius. It extended to my father, to her socialite friends, and to the image of the perfect wife she was performing. But that radius never touched me. As soon as my father left the room, her smile didn't just fade. It vanished, like a light switch to a lower, colder setting. Soon, the invasion reached my own bedroom. "Maya, darling," she said one Sunday afternoon, leaning against my doorframe while I was trying to review a blueprint. "David and I were talking. Your room has the best natural light, and I really need a dedicated space for my wellness studio. Since you're hardly ever here and practically an adult, we thought it would be best if you moved your things to the guest room in the West Wing." I looked at my father, who was standing behind her, avoiding my gaze. "Dad? This has been my room since I was 5. "It's just for a while, Maya," he mumbled, his voice lacking the resonance it once had. "Sandra needs the space for her brand. We have to support each other as a family, right?" That was the word they used as a weapon. Family. By the time I moved my last box to the smaller, draftier guest room, my mother's presence in the house was being systematically erased. The modernization of the Miller home meant replacing the warm, lived-in furniture with cold marble and sharp glass. It was as if she was trying to scrub the very soul out of the walls. And my father? He didn't just watch it happen, he funded the demolition. He was a man who had lost his backbone, a weak spine, who would rather lose his daughter's respect than his wife's approval. The tension soon spilled over into the Miller & Sons office. For years, I had been the junior architect, the one who understood the structural integrity of our projects. But Sandra started showing up at the office, sitting in on meetings she had no business being in. She didn't understand the load-bearing capacity of a steel beam, but she understood the arithmetic of influence. She started whispering about reallocating assets and streamlining the hierarchy. I'd be in the middle of a presentation for a new hospital wing in Scottsdale, and she would interrupt, her voice dripping with fake concern. "David, don't you think Maya is taking on too much? Maybe we should have the senior partners handle the client relations. We don't want our little girl getting too stressed." I wasn't a little girl. I was a licensed architect with a master's degree. But to my father, through the lens of Sandra's manipulation, I was becoming a liability. He started canceling our weekly lunches. He stopped forwarding me the quarterly financial reviews. I was being phased out from the legacy Grandpa Arthur had built for me. The isolation was surgical. I would call his cell phone and Sandra would answer. "Oh, Maya, he's in a very important meeting with the bank. I'll tell him you called." He never called back. I would send him emails with project updates, and I'd get a reply from Sandra's address. "David says thanks, but we're going in a different direction with this one." I remember one night I went to the kitchen to get a glass of water. The door to the study was cracked open. My father and Sandra were hunched over Grandpa Arthur's cedar desk, the sanctuary I wasn't allowed to enter anymore. "The trust, David," I heard her hiss. "If we can just get the access code to that specific fund, we could clear the debt on the North Valley project in a week. Why would Arthur leave 40% of the operational liquid to a girl who doesn't even respect your new marriage?" "It's locked, Sandra." My father's voice sounded tired, defeated. The old man was clever. "It requires a specific PIN and a digital signature from Maya's terminal. I don't have it." "Then we find a way to get it," she replied, her voice cold and sharp. "Family means sacrifice, doesn't it? She'll give it up if she realizes she has no other choice." I stood in the shadows of the hallway, the cold water in my glass shaking. They weren't just taking my room or my photos anymore. They were coming for the foundation. They were coming for the load bearer. But as I looked at the dark silhouette of my father, the man who used to be my hero, I realized that I wasn't the prey in this house. I was the architect. And an architect knows that when a structure is compromised beyond repair, you don't try to patch the cracks. You prepare for a controlled demolition. I retreated to my room and pulled out the gold-embossed card Grandpa Arthur had given me. I looked at the code on the back. Sandra thought she was playing a game of emotions, but I was playing a game of structural stability. She wanted the arithmetic of my inheritance? Fine. I would give her exactly what the contract demanded, but it wouldn't be the payday she was dreaming of. It would be the weight that brought her whole facade crashing down. If you are watching this and you feel the walls of your own home closing in on you, if you feel like you are being edited out of your own life story, stay with me. Because the moment you stop being the victim and start being the one who does the math is the moment you win. Before we move into the night that changed everything, please take a moment to subscribe. Your support helps me keep telling these stories of standing your ground when everyone expects you to crumble. Now, let's talk about that night in the study, the night the fist was raised and the pin was demanded. The clock on the wall of Grandpa Arthur's study ticked with a heavy, rhythmic precision, each sound feeling like a hammer blow against my nerves. It was 11:42 p.m. Outside, the Arizona desert wind was howling, rattling the window panes of the Miller estate. But inside, the air was dead still. I was sitting in the oversized leather chair, the one where Grandpa used to teach me about the arithmetic of legacy. Opposite me, Sandra stood, her face illuminated by the harsh yellow glow of the brass desk lamp. She wasn't the warm, attentive woman who had entered our lives 3 years ago. The mask had finally slipped, leaving behind something cold, sharp, and hungry. "I'm going to ask you one last time, Maya," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous low frequency. "The PIN for the primary trust account. Your father needs to bridge the gap for the North Valley project, and that money is just sitting there, dormant. It's for the family. Give it to me." I looked down at the cedar surface of the desk. I could smell the faint scent of old blueprints and the butterscotch candies Grandpa used to keep in the drawer. "The trust isn't for the North Valley project, Sandra," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's a protected asset, and according to the operating agreement, it can only be accessed with a dual key code and my personal authorization. You know that. That's why you're standing here at midnight instead of calling a board meeting." Sandra's eyes narrowed into slits. She turned her head slightly. "David, are you going to let your daughter talk to me like this? Are you going to let her hold our future hostage because of some outdated sentiment for a dead man?" I looked toward the door. My father, David Miller, was standing there. He was the man who had taught me how to swing a hammer, the man who told me I'd be the steel beam of this family. But as he stepped into the light, I saw the weak spine Grandpa Arthur had warned me about in his final letter. He looked tired, his eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling slightly. He wasn't a leader anymore. He was a man who had traded his daughter's respect for the quiet life Sandra promised him, a life that was costing him everything. "Maya, just give her the code," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "It's just a number. We'll put the money back. Sandra says the interest alone will cover the costs." "Sandra says?" I repeated, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. "Dad, have you even seen the Sandpiper Holdings records? Have you seen where the company's liquid assets have been migrating for the last 18 months? She's not bridging a gap, she's building a bridge out of here, and she's using your bricks to do it." Sandra didn't flinch. She didn't deny it. Instead, she leaned over the desk, her shadow stretching across me like a predator. "You think you're so smart, don't you? Sitting there in Arthur's chair playing architect. You're nothing but a footnote in this family, Maya. A remnant of a past your father is desperate to forget." She looked at my father and nodded. It was a command. My father reached back, grabbed the heavy brass handle, and slammed the study door shut. The sound was deafening, a final thud that signaled the end of any civil conversation. He turned the deadbolt. The click of the lock felt like a physical weight on my chest. "Dad, what are you doing?" I asked, my heart beginning to race. He didn't answer. He walked toward me, his shadow looming large against the bookshelves. He stopped just 2 feet away. He looked at Sandra, looking for approval, and then he looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw genuine, unbridled rage in his eyes. It wasn't the rage of a man who had been wronged. It was the rage of a man who was ashamed, and had decided to blame the person who reminded him of his shame. "The pin, Maya," he growled. "Now." "No," I said, my voice a whisper of defiance. He raised his fist. I remember the way the light caught the gold ring on his finger, the ring my mother had given him on their 10th anniversary. He pulled his arm back, his knuckles white, his face contorted. He expected me to scream. He expected me to cower, to cover my face, to beg for him to stop. He thought that by closing the door and raising his hand, he could erase 28 years of blood and replace it with Sandra's arithmetic. But I didn't look away. I looked him straight in the eye, searching for a trace of the man who used to carry me on his shoulders. I found nothing. And in that moment, the last thread of loyalty I held for him snapped. "Grandpa Arthur told me this day would come," I said, my voice cold as the Arizona night. "He told me the foundation would crack. He told me the load would become too much for a man with no spine." As his fist began to move forward, a desperate, clumsy swing born of frustration, I didn't flinch. I didn't move my head. Instead, I slowly, deliberately raised my right leg. Sandra let out a sharp gasp, thinking I was attempting a pathetic kick to defend myself. My father's fist stopped mid-air, his confusion momentarily overriding his anger. "What are you doing?" he spat. My foot didn't go toward him. It went under the heavy cedar desk, into the small, recessed space where the wood met the floor. My toe found the small, square button, the panic button Grandpa Arthur had installed back in '94. He had told me it was for burglars, but as I pressed it down with all the strength I had left, I realized it was for this exact moment. The button didn't make a sound. There were no sirens, no flashing lights. But I knew that 3 miles away, at the headquarters of a private security firm my grandfather had paid into a 50-year contract for, a Category 1 silent distress signal had just been triggered. "I'm giving you 1 minute to open that door, Dad," I said, my legs still held in place, my foot firm against the button. "You think a little kick is going to save you?" Sandra laughed, a shrill, hysterical sound. "David, she's losing it. Take her phone, get the code." My father lunged for me, his hand grabbing my shoulder. But at that exact second, the house groaned. A loud mechanical clunk echoed from the basement, the sound of the main breakers being remotely tripped. The brass lamp flickered and died. The entire study was plunged into a suffocating, absolute darkness. "What happened?" Sandra shrieked. "David, the lights!" "I didn't do it," he shouted, his voice cracking with sudden fear. In the darkness, I was the only one who knew the layout of the room. I was the one who had spent my childhood playing under this desk. I slipped out of the chair, my movements silent and practiced. I navigated around the side of the desk, toward the hidden floor safe near the bookshelves. "Maya, where are you?" My father's voice was frantic now. He was stumbling in the dark, his hands hitting the cedar desk, knocking over the bare paperweight. I didn't answer. I reached the safe, my fingers dancing over the keypad. I didn't need light. I knew the sequence by heart. It wasn't the pin Sandra wanted. It was the override protocol. Outside, the sound of gravel crunching under tires cut through the wind. Then, the blinding flash of high-beam spotlights hit the study windows, cutting through the darkness like searchlights. Blue and red strobes began to dance against the mahogany walls. The heavy thud-thud-thud of boots on the porch followed. "Phoenix Private Security, open the door immediately!" A voice boomed through a megaphone. Sandra was frozen. I could hear her sharp, shallow breathing in the dark. My father had stopped moving. He was standing in the center of the room, a silhouette of a man who had realized he had just committed a crime against his only child, in a room built by his father. "Maya," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Maya, tell them it was a mistake. Tell them we were just talking." I stood up, the override documents and the backup drive clutched to my chest. The backup power for the study's emergency lights kicked in, a soft red glow that made the room look like a crime scene. I looked at him, standing there with his fist still partially raised, and then at Sandra, who was frantically trying to smooth her hair and put her mask back on. "It wasn't a mistake, Dad," I said, walking toward the door. "It was arithmetic. You calculated that my fear was worth more than my rights. You calculated that Sandra's greed was more important than Grandpa's legacy. But you forgot the most important part of the equation." I reached the door and turned the deadbolt from the inside. "An architect doesn't just build walls," I said as the door swung open to reveal 4 armed security officers and the cold, judging glare of the police. "An architect builds exits, and tonight, I'm walking out of yours. If you're listening to this, and you've ever felt the door lock behind you, metaphorically or literally, remember that you are the one who holds the key to your own response. They can raise their fists, but they can't take your mind if you've already done the math." Before we move on to how I dismantled their empire piece by piece, using the very documents I took from that safe, please subscribe and leave a comment. Have you ever had to stand your ground against someone you once loved? Tell me your story. Now, let's see what was on that drive, and how Sandra's Florida wellness studio was about to become a federal evidence file. The elevator in the Thorne and Associates building smelled of lemon polish and old, expensive paper. It was 9:03 a.m. on Monday morning, exactly 34 hours after I had walked out of the Miller estate under the cold blue strobes of a security detail. My left side, where my father's shadow had loomed the largest, still felt a phantom chill, but my hands were steady. I was no longer the daughter looking for a father. I was the architect looking for the load-bearing failure. Marcus Thorne was already at his desk. He was a man who didn't believe in small talk. He was 70, with silver hair that looked like it had been carved out of granite, and eyes that had seen every version of human greed possible in the state of Arizona. On his desk sat the backup drive I had pulled from Grandpa Arthur's safe, and a manila folder thick with the original operating agreement from 1994. "Sit down, Maya," Marcus said, his voice a low, rhythmic gravel. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't offer sympathy. He knew that in this room, sympathy was a distraction. I've had my forensic accountant, a man named Frank, look at the drive you provided. We also ran a trace on the digital signatures used for the North Valley project transfers. I sat in the leather chair, the same kind of chair Grandpa had in his study, and waited. I thought about Sandra's face in the dark, the way her mask had shattered when the security team arrived. She had called me a footnote. Today, I was going to be the entire chapter. Your grandfather Arthur was a brilliant man, Maya, Marcus continued, sliding a printout across the desk. He didn't just build a company, he built a cage. He knew your father had a weak spine, as he called it in his private notes. He knew David would eventually let someone else hold the hammer. So, he drafted Clause 11.4 in the Miller & Sons operating agreement. I leaned forward. The paper was covered in columns of numbers and legal terminology, but I focused on the highlighted section. Clause 11.4, Mandatory buyback and operational forfeiture, Marcus read aloud. It states that any attempt by a majority member to reallocate trust assets without the written consent of the secondary beneficiary, that's you, triggers an immediate independent appraisal. The remaining members have 90 days to buy out your 40% at fair market value. If they cannot pay, the LLC restructures under a court-appointed trustee. Your father would lose day-to-day control of everything, from the equipment yard to the office coffee machine. They don't have the money to buy me out, I said, my voice measured and precise, stripped of any emotion that didn't serve the calculation. Sandra has been pushing the North Valley project because they're underwater. They're using the company's credit line to pay for their lifestyle in Paradise Valley. It's worse than that, Marcus said. He flipped to the next page in the folder. Frank pulled the wire records. For 36 months, a steady stream of $4,000 has been leaving the company's secondary money market account. Every single month, on the first business day, I stared at the number. $4,000. It wasn't enough to trigger an audit, but over 3 years, it added up to $144,000. Where was it going? To a Florida-registered LLC called Azure Management Holdings, Marcus replied. I had a paralegal pull the registration. It's a single-member LLC registered in St. Petersburg. The sole member? A woman named Catherine Miller. Do you know her? Catherine? No. Wait. I closed my eyes. I remembered an old holiday card I'd seen in Sandra's purse once. To my sister Catherine, with love. It's Sandra's sister. She's been wiring company money to her own family in Florida for 3 years. And here is the arithmetic that will break them, Maya. Marcus leaned back, setting his pen down with a definitive click. The wire instructions for these transfers were not issued from your father's terminal at the office. My forensic guy traced the source IP addresses. Your father is 71. He still uses a flip phone and calls the cable company because he can't find the menu on the TV. He's never opened an online banking app in his life. Then who? The IP addresses resolved to a residential cable modem in Scottsdale, Marcus said, looking me straight in the eye. The account is in Sandra's name. She's been using your father's credentials, his username, his password, his two-factor recovery, to siphon off the legacy while he stood by and watched her erase you. She didn't just want the pin to the trust. She had already been picking the locks on everything else. A cold, hard feeling settled in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. Anger is a fire that burns itself out. This was concrete, solid, heavy, and permanent. I thought about my mother's photos in the garage, the way I was moved to the guest room, and the raised fist in the dark. All of it was a distraction so Sandra could finish the arithmetic of her theft. She knew about my grandfather's specific requirements, I realized. That's why she needed the PIN that night. The trust account has a higher level of security that she couldn't bypass with just a password. She needed me to beg. She needed me to break. But you didn't, Marcus said, a ghost of a smile appearing on his granite face. You raised your leg and pressed a button instead. And because you did, we now have the forensic evidence of wire fraud, elder financial abuse, and a violation of the operating agreement that your father signed without reading past page 4. I stood up and walked to the window. Below, the traffic of Phoenix moved in a silent, organized grid. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I was wearing a navy dress, Grandpa Arthur's favorite color. I looked like a woman who could design a hospital wing or a bridge, but I also looked like a woman who knew exactly how to dismantle a structure that was no longer safe to inhabit. What's the next step, Marcus? I've already drafted the formal notification. he said, tapping a white envelope on his desk. Richard, your father, will receive it via certified mail in 48 hours. It informs him of your voluntary relinquishment of your 40% stake and the mandatory 90-day buyback. It also includes a courtesy copy of the forensic report regarding Azure Management Holdings. I've already been in contact with the county prosecutor's office. The arithmetic of Sandra's secret life is about to become a matter of public record. Will he fight it? He can't. The clause is ironclad. Your grandfather had it drafted by a specialist specifically to survive this scenario. There is no loophole. There is no angle of attack. He has 90 days to find nearly $2 million, or he loses the firm. He doesn't have $2 million, I said quietly. Then he forfeits operational control, Marcus replied. The court will appoint a trustee to oversee the liquidation or restructuring. The Miller & Sons sign will stay up, but the man behind the desk will be a stranger. I picked up my purse and the folder. I felt a strange sense of peace. For 14 years, I had been the one trying to hold the weight. I had been the steel beam in a house that didn't want me. I had sat at their table, ate their food, and watched them erase my mother's name from the walls, all while I waited for my father to remember who I was. But as I walked toward the door, I remembered what Grandpa Arthur told me on that stack of lumber. Be the beam. Always be the thing that holds the weight, when everyone else is just looking at the paint. I wasn't destroying my father's life. I was just letting the structure reflect its true integrity. If the foundation was built on Sandra's greed and my father's silence, it was never meant to stand. Maya, Marcus called out as I reached the door. I turned back. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Once I file these documents on Monday morning, the clock starts. There is no calling it back. It's arithmetic now. I looked at the gold-embossed card in my hand, then at the manila folder that held the truth about the woman my father had chosen over me. File it, Marcus, I said, my voice as solid as the steel beams Grandpa Arthur loved. The numbers don't lie. It's time for the Miller family to see what happens when the load-bearer finally steps away. If you're watching this, and you've spent years trying to save a relationship that was already being sold from under you, stay with me. Because the moment you stop being the victim and start being the one who does the math is the moment you win. Before we move into the final reckoning, the dinner where the white envelope arrives and the truth comes out, please subscribe and drop a comment. Have you ever had to use the truth as a weapon? Now, let's see what happened when my father realization hit him that he had raised his fist against the only person who was actually protecting his legacy. The meeting was set for Saturday afternoon, exactly 7 days after the night of the raised fist. I didn't go alone. Marcus Thorne walked beside me, his leather briefcase looking like a weapon in the afternoon light. We didn't knock. I still had my key, and for the last time, I used it to enter the house that once held my mother's laughter. The dining room table was set, but not for dinner. Sandra was there, her eyes puffy, her hair uncharacteristically messy. My father sat at the head of the table, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in a week. The weak spine was now fully visible. He couldn't even lift his chin to look at me. Maya, thank God you're here, Sandra started, her voice a desperate, high-pitched warble. We can fix this. Your father was just stressed. He didn't mean anything. We're family, right? Families don't use security guards and lawyers against each other. I didn't sit down. I stood at the opposite end of the table, the place where Grandpa Arthur used to sit. Marcus set the white envelope in front of my father. This isn't a conversation about feelings, Sandra, I said, my voice echoing in the cold marble room. It's a conversation about arithmetic. Marcus, if you would. Marcus didn't waste a second. Mr. Miller, this folder contains the forensic report of Azure Management Holdings. It details 47 monthly transfers of $4,000 each, sent from your company's secondary account to an LLC in Florida, registered to a Catherine Voss, Sandra's sister. The silence that followed was absolute. My father's eyes moved from the folder to Sandra. The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. He had chosen this woman over his own blood, and she had been selling his legacy for $4,000 a month. David, it was for us, Sandra shrieked, her hand grasping for his arm. For our retirement, for the future you promised me. He pulled his arm away as if her touch was acid. He looked at the white envelope, his hands shaking as he opened it. He read the notification of Clause 11.4, the mandatory buyback, the $2 million price tag for his daughter's silence. $2 million? He whispered, his voice cracking. Maya, I don't have this. The North Valley project we're barely breaking even. If I pay this, the company will have to sell the equipment yard. We'll be a shell. I know, I said. Grandpa Arthur knew too. He wrote that clause because he knew you'd let an intruder into the foundation. You have 90 days to find the liquid, or the court appoints a trustee. Either way, Sandra's access to the Miller accounts ends today. I've already filed the injunction. Sandra stood up, her face contorting into the same sneer I'd seen in the dark. You're destroying him. You're destroying everything he worked for just because I took your mother's photos down? You're pathetic, Maya. I looked at her, and for the first time I felt nothing. No anger, no hurt, just the cold clarity of a finished blueprint. I'm not destroying anything, Sandra. I'm just letting the load fall where it was always going to fall. You thought I was a footnote? No, I'm the load bearer, and I've decided to move to a new structure. I turned to my father. He looked up at me, his eyes wet with a realization that came too late. Maya, please. You had 28 years to be my father, Dad. You had 14 years to see what she was doing, and you had one night to keep that door open. You closed it. Now the arithmetic has to be finished. I walked out of the room, Marcus following close behind. As I reached the front door, I heard the sound of Sandra shouting, and my father finally, for the first time in 3 years, raising his voice to tell her to leave. But I didn't look back. An architect doesn't look back at a building that's already been condemned. I stood in my new office today, watching the Arizona sun set over a city that finally respects my designs. The cedar desk from Grandpa Arthur's study is gone, replaced by a clean glass surface that holds only my blueprints and a single gold-embossed card. I didn't take the desk with me. You simply cannot carry the debris of a broken past into a future that requires a clean, honest foundation. 3 months have passed since that final reckoning. My father called me once last week, his voice sounding hollow and small, asking if we could start over. I told him that a professional architect doesn't rebuild on a site that has been condemned by its own faulty materials. He still has 80 days to find the buyback funds, or the firm, the one he allowed Sandra to pick apart, will no longer be his. Sandra herself is gone, facing a restitution case that no amount of her twisted arithmetic can solve. Here's the truth I've carried from that dark study. The people who try to make you feel small in your own family aren't doing it because you lack value. They do it because they are terrified of what happens when you realize you don't need their permission to stand tall. Your seat at the table is never a gift they can take away. It's a structure you build with your own hands. If you've ever been the one doing the math while everyone else was busy celebrating your erasure, remember this. Don't let their raised fists or their cold silences become your ceiling. Build your own empire. Thank you for walking through this journey with me. If Maya's story reminded you of your own worth, please subscribe and share this video. Drop a comment below. Have you ever had to walk away to finally find yourself? I'll see you in the next story.